You know what's strange? Nobody has ever told you that you're intimidating. Not directly. Nobody sat you down and said, "Hey, you make people uncomfortable," but you've felt it. That moment, mid-conversation, when someone goes just slightly quieter. When a perfectly good discussion suddenly gets steered somewhere safer. When you share a thought, a real one, and the person across from you laughs nervously and says, "Wow, you think about things a lot, don't you?" And you smile. Because what else do you do? You've been doing this your whole life. Reading rooms, noticing things, catching what's not being said, and quietly filing it away, because bringing it up would only make things more awkward. Here's what nobody told you, and what psychology actually explains. That distance you feel from people sometimes, that subtle gap that shows up even with people who genuinely like you, it's not rejection. It might be something else entirely. And today, we're going to name exactly what's happening. 7 signs that your intelligence is quietly intimidating the people around you, without you ever saying a wrong word, doing anything wrong, or meaning to at all. If even one of these feels personal, keep watching. Because by the end of this, you're going to understand something about yourself that most people around you never will. 1. You ask questions that go deeper than people expect. Think about the last time you were genuinely curious about something someone said. You didn't just nod along. You wanted to understand it more fully. So you asked a follow-up question, maybe 2. Not to challenge them, just because you actually wanted to know. And something shifted. They got a little defensive, or they laughed it off. Or they said, "I don't know. I never really thought about it," and then quickly changed the subject. Here's what was actually happening in that moment. Your question didn't just ask for information. It accidentally exposed a gap between what they said and what they actually understood. And according to psychologist Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance, that gap creates real psychological discomfort. People don't like having their ideas examined too closely, especially in casual settings where nobody signed up for a deep conversation. Think of it like this. Imagine someone casually mentions they built a little shelf. You ask how they did the corner joints. Suddenly, they're scrambling because they just glued it and hoped for the best. And your question made that very obvious. You weren't judging the shelf. You were just interested in shelves. But that's the thing about genuinely curious people. Their questions have weight. And not everyone is ready for that kind of weight in a Tuesday afternoon chat. 2. People seem to simplify themselves around you. This one is quieter, but it's one of the most telling signs of all. Have you ever noticed that people give you shorter answers than usual? That they keep things surface level around you specifically. That they seem almost careful about what they say, editing themselves in real time, in a way they don't bother doing around other people. It's not your imagination. There's a well-documented psychological response called impression management. First studied by sociologist Irving Goffman, which describes how people constantly manage how they come across to others. But here's the key detail. The more perceptive they believe the other person to be, the harder they work at that management. In other words, the more intelligent they sense you are, the more self-conscious they become. It's like being asked to cook a meal for a Michelin-starred chef. You might cook perfectly well every single day of your life. But the moment that chef sits down at your table, your hands get shaky. Not because they said a word, just because of who they are and what they might notice. That's what your presence does to people, often without either of you realizing it. They're not pulling away from you. They're pulling away from the version of themselves they're afraid you can see. 3. You pick up on things people wish you hadn't. You catch it before anyone else does. The slight edge in someone's voice when they say they're fine. The smile that arrives half a second too late. The way two people in a group avoid looking at each other. The tension in a room that everyone else has decided to politely pretend isn't there. You see it clearly, immediately. And then you have to decide, do I say something or do I let this go? Most of the time, you let it go. Because you've learned that naming what you see doesn't always go well. What you're experiencing has a name in psychology. Researchers call it heightened perceptual sensitivity, an elevated ability to detect subtle emotional and environmental cues. A 2015 study published in the journal Intelligence found that people with higher cognitive ability process both sensory and social information more quickly and more deeply than average. But here is the part nobody talks about. People can feel when they're being truly seen, not observed, seen. And for someone who isn't used to being understood at that level, it can feel unsettling, exposing. Like standing under a very bright light when you were expecting soft, comfortable shade. So they step back, not because they dislike you, but because your perception makes them feel visible in ways they didn't choose. 4. Your silence gets mistaken for judgment. You're a thinker. Before you speak, you actually think. You weigh what you want to say. You consider your words carefully. And to you, that pause before you respond is completely natural. It's just how your mind works. But to the person watching you from across the table, that pause feels like something else entirely. We live in a culture that rewards fast, loud, confident responses. Speaking quickly signals certainty. Speaking slowly signals hesitation, or worse, disapproval. So when you take 2 genuine seconds to consider what someone just said, they've already filled that silence with a story. They think I said something stupid. They're not impressed. They're judging me. Psychologists call this attribution error, when we assign meaning to someone's behavior based on our own internal fears rather than any actual evidence. Your pause isn't judgment, but it lands that way. And over time, it builds an invisible wall between you and others, one you never intended, never built consciously, and probably didn't even know was there. The painful irony. The very thing that makes you a thoughtful, careful communicator is the same thing that accidentally makes people feel unsafe around you. 5. People open up to you one-on-one, but keep their distance in groups. You've noticed this. You know you have. In private, a person is completely open with you. They share real things. They laugh easily. The conversation goes somewhere genuine. You leave thinking, okay, we actually connect. Then you see them in a group setting, and it's like someone turned a dial. They're friendly, but formal. They don't direct things toward you the way they do in private. Sometimes they barely acknowledge you at all. And you walk away confused, maybe a little hurt, wondering which version of them was real. Both versions were real. That's the honest answer. Here's the psychology. In groups, people perform. They're managing multiple impressions simultaneously. How they look to the group, how they look to you, whether the two are compatible. And being closely associated with someone highly intelligent in a public setting raises the perceived social stakes dramatically. Suddenly, they feel like they have to keep up in front of witnesses. And that feels risky in a way that a private conversation never does. Researcher Bib Latinet's work on social impact theory shows that the more people present in a social situation, the more each individual modifies their behavior based on perceived social pressure. Your presence is a kind of pressure, not an aggressive one, but a real one. And in groups, people feel it more. The connection you have with them in private is completely genuine. Groups just bring out the armor. And your presence means the armor goes on a little faster. 6. You've been called intense when you were just being honest. You weren't performing. You weren't trying to dominate the conversation. You were just engaged. You cared about the topic. You said what you actually thought clearly, directly, without the usual social softening that most people instinctively layer over their real opinions. And afterward, someone said you were intense, or too serious, or that you think too much, or some version of relax. It's not that deep. But it was that deep. To you, it was exactly that deep. And the fact that it wasn't deep to them is not a personality flaw. It's a difference in cognitive engagement. Here's what's actually happening. Most everyday conversations run on an unspoken social contract. Keep it light, keep it comfortable, don't push too far below the surface. It's not a conscious decision people make. It's just the default mode of most social interaction. When you break that contract, not rudely, just honestly, it creates friction. The same way a sudden change in temperature creates physical discomfort. Nobody's wrong. The temperature just changed. Research on communication styles consistently shows that highly analytical thinkers are more direct, more precise, and more willing to hold a position under mild social pressure. To them, that's just intellectual honesty. To people who aren't used to it, it reads as intensity, sometimes even aggression. You're not intense, you're just honest. Those two things get confused more than almost anything else. 7. People respect you more than they relax around you. This is the hardest one to say out loud, because it doesn't look like a problem from the outside. People think well of you. They value your perspective. They come to you when they need real advice, a clear head, someone who will actually tell them the truth. In many ways, you're the person others rely on. But there's something underneath that. A warmth and ease, a sense of being fully included that sometimes feels just out of reach. Like there's a glass wall between you and the room. You can see everything clearly. You just can't always get fully inside it. And in your quietest moments, you wonder, why does it feel lonely, even when I'm surrounded by people who respect me? Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades studying highly creative and intelligent individuals, found one experience that showed up consistently across almost all of them. A sense of being slightly out of step with the social world around them. Not rejected, never truly rejected, just not fully at ease. Like they were always translating between their internal world and the external one, and the translation took energy that other people never seemed to need. Respect and comfort don't always arrive together. And when your mind operates at a register that others find genuinely impressive, it can create an invisible ceiling on how much people let their guard down around you. It's not rejection. It's something closer to reverence. But reverence, as it turns out, is one of the loneliest things a person can inspire, because it keeps people just far enough away that they never fully arrive. So, did any of those signs feel familiar? If they did, here's the most important thing we want you to take away from this video. None of these signs are flaws. Not a single one. They are simply the natural social side effects of a mind that processes the world differently, more deeply, more perceptively, more honestly than most. That doesn't mean connection is out of reach for you. It means you may need to find your people a little more intentionally. The ones who aren't unsettled by your depth, but genuinely energized by it. They exist. And when you find them, that invisible distance disappears completely. In the meantime, be patient with yourself and with the people around you. Most of them aren't pulling away because they don't like you. They're just not sure how to keep up yet. As always, thanks so much for watching. If this video resonated with you, let us know which sign felt the most familiar in the comments below. And if you know someone who might relate to this, go ahead and share it with them. It might help them understand themselves a little better, too. We'll see you in the next one.